Look at you.
Look at me.
Selecting a bagel.
I don't even know how to begin to comprehend a normal script for a movie like this, for a review like this, so I think I'm going to start with the simple facts of exactly what you need to know 30 seconds into this video, and that is that this is a masterpiece. That's it. That's the whole video. You want to talk about art, you want to talk about the abstract, otherworldly, unparalleled, visceral momentum of sound and color and imagination and heart and soul and purpose and storytelling? Okay, let's do that. Let's just say it. Across the Spider-Verse is a goddamn magnum opus. It's one of the greatest comic book movies ever made. Yeah, there is no debate here. It's probably the greatest Spider-Man movie. It is the greatest Spider-Man story, you can tell. Like, only Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 is even head-to-head with this thing at this point. It could become the best Spidey story of all time. I think it's there, but is this the greatest sequel to a superhero movie ever? I love Winter Soldier. I love Captain America. He's my favorite MCU hero. But yes, this movie is better than every single sequel movie in the superhero genre. It surpassed No Way Home, which is still unbelievably good as its own movie, by the way. But my god, I don't even know, I don't know how to do this video. I'll try. This is my rant of Across the Spider-Verse. Spoilers be warned. Let's go. God damn, I love this movie. I love this character. I love this world that's been built. This is easily like the most exhilarating Spider-Man story I think I've ever read or watched or experienced. It's not really close. This movie, it feels like a fever dream. This movie feels like I'm reading the greatest Spider-Man story of all time and one of the greatest comics of all time. Easily one of the greatest stories Marvel has ever told, just flat out. Spider-Man has always felt like this battle of the existential versus the personal, and this movie personifies so much of that. It brings those tensions to form. You have Miles' conflict against the Spider Society and the identity of being validated as Spider-Man versus the Spot's existential threat of a snowball effect and the growing danger of losing a parent, and just the existence of Spot as this like ticking time bomb out there in the universe. It all brings so much weight and atmosphere to this world that's already designed to be atmospheric. This movie truly, almost more than any other version, understands Spider-Man. It understands the mantle of it and what that mask means, and how you frame that by challenging it from the inside, from the outside, and from all different angles all at once. Spider-Man's greatest superpower is not his strength, or his webbing, or his wall crawling. It's his ability to simply endure, to constantly endure and keep putting on the mask, and Spider-Man is about not standing aside when someone is in trouble. And that's what they imbue into Miles, and it sounds so simple, but it's just executed so unbelievably well in this film. The core and the essence, the literal like lifeblood of Spider-Man and his stories and the world he can fight in and grow in and become unique in, this movie nails all of that. It nails every single detail. There's a really good science fiction movie in here about time and its consequences and the responsibility of that knowledge, along with dismantling the organizations you once knew. It's all just so colorful and builds into the lore of Spider-Man. I don't think you could tell this kind of story without Spider-Man, and I don't think you could tell this Spider-Man story without the medium and colors and sounds and artistry that was needed for this film in animation, because it's all so seamless. It coalesces into one undeniable, untouchable masterpiece of creation. I can't stop thinking about this movie, and the more I think about it, the better it keeps getting, and the deeper the subtext goes, and the more layers you find, and the more details you pick up from the first film that spell out everything you missed, and all of those answers are relevant in this movie. It validates every single Spider-Man across the comics and films, TV shows, video games. It makes them all important. It turns the tropes into necessary and powerful character moments and makes everything matter. Every detail matters by retroactively enhancing Into the Spider-Verse. Like, it does the idea of stopping someone's death before it happens movie trope that we've seen 1,000 times, but it does it in such a unique and different way that it doesn't feel corny here. No animated movie will touch this. I don't see how it's possible. This is so authentically Spider-Man, from the iota of colors and the scenes to the very soul of what Spider-Man stories are about. This is just on a different level. This movie is overwhelming. It's so overwhelming, from its animation to its score and the action, My God, the action is so powerful in this film. It completely blows Into the Spider-Verse out of the water, and you feel every single fight scene like it was live action. It's on the level of Spider-Man 2, a film widely regarded as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, superhero movies of all time, and arguably the most important superhero movie of all time for what it did for the genre and pop culture. And I think we should be looking at Across the Spider-Verse in the same light. Spider-Man is the perfect vessel to tell this kind of story, and this movie, man, it's fucking perfect. It's a work of art with how it comes together and its cohesiveness and innovation in what it does. It's like a supercharged version of its predecessor. I don't know how this movie got made. I don't know how human beings did this, how they animated and created this world of art, but it all works. It tells a deeply competent and compelling story in the most pure way and makes Miles stand above the rest. It goes bigger and louder and bolder by going deeper. This movie is Picasso, it's Shakespearean, it's cel-shaded Van Gogh abstractionism in the beauty of its divine crescendos of imagination. This is the Civil War event, but for Spider-Man. The different uses of color to highlight emotions and emphasize styles, the palettes and design styles in different universes that all mix together, keeping their rigidity or liquidity all together at once. This movie is abstract expressionism while having form and maintaining physicality in an otherworldly spirit. That's insane. It travels to the places out of bounds, visually, structurally, canonically, mentally. It's all so eerie and dark because it operates in the space between spaces. It not only pits Miles against himself, his own interest, and his friends, it pits him against his idea of identity and his own inner ego, and it pits him against the physical universe in ways no other Spider-Man has really seen before. He's fighting a war on one front with Spot, then another with Miguel, then another with Earth-42, then one with Gwen internally. Meanwhile, nearly every single Spider-Man in the society is trying to hunt him down. I mean, what story could be more one-man army Spider-Man at its purest than this? For God's sake, even look at what the counselor said in the beginning of this movie to his parents. Miles needs a story. And then Miles walks in and replies, that's a little weird. Not everybody needs a story, because he's right. Everyone is trying to make his story for him. Everyone is trying to tell him how his story is supposed to go. And what does he do? When facing overwhelming odds, his own identity crisis, a universal shattering experience, and a personal war with an existential time bomb in the spot, he stands up on a train that's speeding into the heavens, into the gates of destiny, and he stands completely alone. He proclaims himself, accepts himself, and endures into that leap of faith into becoming Spider-Man. He says, nah, I'ma do my own thing. Against the entire society, against the multiverse, against Spot, against Gwen and Peter and Spider-Man 2099. That is fucking Spider-Man. Just let Miles be Miles. Let him step into the role and ascend to greatness. And that is exactly what he does. Speaking of ascending into the role of Spider-Man, this movie is like the purest story for Spider-Man you can really tell. There's a core of Spider people in here that make up the story, and they're all reliant on each other, and none of it ever really feels conveniently excused or made to get the plot moving, which is great. It all feels really natural with how it weaves back and forth into the story to form that image. The movie has so much tension because it's a race against time, and it works almost from the future of itself backwards, dissecting the nuances along the way, from the locations to the musical score to the clear influence of older Spider-Man literature and their animated and live-action influence. This feels like a film that was made in Dementia 5. That's a really old school Spider-Man reference from his 60s television show. Spider-Man is supposed to feel grand, larger than life. He's supposed to be fighting a personal and intimate war with himself while dealing with things way beyond his pay grade and bigger than life itself. And that's what this movie does. It just nails the grandiosity of Spider-Man. Miles is so unique to Spider-Man as an idea, of course, but to the mantle of Spider-Man, he fits perfectly. The entire existence of this character has been told that he was a freak and that he didn't belong, and now you have this kid in Miles who's essentially told he's an error code, he's an anomaly, he's a mistake, an outlier, literally in the universe, and that is the most Spider-Man thing to deal with. Miles is trying to save his identity and give validity to his reality, to become real, to give weight to his existence and prove that there's always another way because there's no one like Miles Morales, literally. And that's what's so cool about it. The tropes and dialogue and observations are all meta without being annoying. They're important without being oversold, and it all comes back to this idea of breaking generational trauma that just so happens to fall on Miles' shoulders as he looks to put identity forefront into the mask and into the mantle. This is such an original weaving of a story for Spider-Man. I'd go so as far as to say that this is one of the best Spider-Man stories ever written, one of the best stories Marvel has ever told like before, and it's happening in this medium, which I couldn't be more excited about. It's a complete understanding of what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man, what makes him so cool as a character, and why his stories are so important. This movie is so much about the mantle of Spider-Man and dissecting it more than what we're accustomed to, and it doesn't fall into the cliche traps that some other Spider-Man media tend to. It handles the familiarity with new perspectives and just changes the way you see these characters. It revolutionizes the way we look at Spider-Man, at the mantle of the mask, and the impact on the multiverse. It balances all those core tenets of a Spider-Man story in one grand swoosh. Love interests, personal relationship turmoils, school desires, existential threats, identity issues with the mask, all of this is being juggled all at once. This movie is about how lonely it is to be Spider-Man, and it shows how this is a love letter to the very existence of Spider-Man with what it does for Miles and Gwen and Peter and even Miguel. It's about growing these characters into their own, and I love that. This movie is dominating. This movie is an experience. At this point, I've seen it 3 times. I plan on going a 4th to continue to soak my brain in just the tapestry that is this world. But this creation is just jaw-dropping. The animation is overwhelming. It's beautiful in the best ways. The pastels, the cell shading, the expressions of emotion and movement, the vibrancy, the tonal changes, the energy, the menacing atmosphere. This movie is unlike anything you'll ever see, and it's so perfect for a Spider-Man story. This story felt so natural and so real. The way they explain the multiverse and how it operates is so real. Nothing ever feels static here. Every scene, even the slow ones, are dynamic because it teaches you how to fall in love with the idea of Spider-Man all over again, the character itself and the world. This movie has so much presence, not just visually, of course, but emotionally and as a piece of cinema, as a piece of art, a thematic experience. Like, it carries you along with it. That feeling is so rare, and I've only felt it a handful of times in all of my years of consuming movies. When you think about the story being told here and how Miles came to be, these 2 movies, Into the Spider-Verse and Cross the Spider-Verse, canonically should not exist. And because they do, they take that freedom and turn it into something so creative and so artful that it feels like so intense for an experience and for a Spider-Man story. The sounds and colors just emphasize the people on screen. The weight of destiny and responsibility jumps out at you from the characters. It's such a dense film without ever feeling like it. Across the Spider-Verse is a moving entity. It's an experience that constantly drowns you in its existence and then pulls you back up for air before submerging you again. I think what I love so much is how no detail is wasted here. Every scene, every shot, every sound, every visual, every pixel is all important, and it retroactively enhances its predecessor because not only do the stories connect, but this movie highlights all the little hints of destiny that we missed in Into the Spider-Verse. By being so good, it continues to make the first film better. By being so visceral and brooding, it becomes this fantastical whirlwind of expressionism that is unlike anything Spider-Man has ever seen before. It essentially does for Spider-Man what Andor did for Star Wars, just makes it a billion times better. I need to talk about Miles and the Spot and Gwen and Spider-Man 2099 and how all of their lives are intertwined in the most brutal ways. Spot as the villain just shows how weird and dangerously personal a Spider-Man villain can be, and why Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery is one of the best in comics of all time. The threatening nature of Spot that grows calmly and annoyingly as the film progresses just adds to the tension that he then brings to the scenes. He's just this haunting villain who transcends, literally, into this apocalyptic-like presence, which really makes him one of the greatest Spider-Man villains we've ever seen on the big screen. When you create an abstract embodiment of the common Spider-Man existential nightmare and make his purpose to be this faceless void of destiny that then directly acts as a catalyst for Miles to become one with the mask and give a face to his own identity, that's what a top-tier Spider-Man villain does. He started off as a nobody getting hit with a bagel and becomes one of the most interesting villains Spider-Man has had in a long time. That's insane. He's a guy with no face against a hero who sees nothing but his own face 1,000 times, and that duplicity is so cool and so well balanced. I love that Spot is treated as this funny, non-threatening villain of the week at first, but progressively and slowly becomes more threatening, and as the movie goes on, he ascends into this ticking time bomb of an existential nightmare. like a boogeyman of the multiverse whose sinister depiction is only elevated by unhinged and phenomenal music and a score that brings his shadow to life. This is all just so Spider-Man in its core, and I'm so happy that it landed the way it did and that Spot worked the way he did. Speaking of landing in the right ways, Miles freaking Morales, man. To borrow a quote from one of my favorite YouTubers, Rob, over at Comics Explained, son, let me tell you something, man. Miles is an S-tier Spider-Man. He is unbelievably incredible in this movie. This movie is Miles' big test of what it takes to wear the mask. It has Miles claim and own his identity of Spider-Man at the very moment his belief and understanding of that identity is being shattered because he shouldn't have been Spider-Man in the first place, but he breaks that generational trauma of being Spider-Man and does his own thing. Like, Miles grows up so much in this movie as Spider-Man. He's forced to stand out because of his story being the way that it is, and then he becomes his own Spider-Man through all of it. He forges his image and owns the idea of being an anomaly. He's the standout because he embraces the chaos of his own story, which writes itself just the way he would want to and not being dictated by anybody else. That is so beautiful. They open up Miles to be so full and so interesting and to carry that responsibility of this movie on his shoulders as he comes into his own, which is such a weight to put on this guy's shoulders, but it works. And it works because Miles is so relatable and grounded as Spider-Man. He follows the words of Sharon Carter when she said, "You must plant yourself like a tree and say, no, you move." From the interpersonal relationships to the canon events to identity, those are all thrown at him all at the same time, and he has to ultimately decide to be the Spider-Man he wants to be, and not the one who, like everybody else, is told how to be. While everyone is telling him how his story is supposed to go, he evades all of that and carries his origin story through a vortex of emotion and brutality into perspective of ego and ID against the world, and does so with such raw and impactful nuance. He essentially becomes the most pure version of Spider-Man because he does his own thing and steps into the mantle of the mask against the most overwhelming odds. He becomes Spider-Man in the face of other Spider-Men, leaving him to be like the purest and most authentic interpretation of the character other than Peter. That is just masterful writing and execution, and I can't stop thinking about how it was all pulled off. Miles is fighting a war of man versus world versus self versus man, all within 2.5 hours, and that is simply mind-blowing to have when you couple it with Gwen and Miles and his parents and that whole other story. And Gwen and Miles both get some form of closure in this film, whether it's about their own identities or what they think of the system or finding their place and creating that for themselves. That is all set up for the next film. Gwen is elevated into such a keystone of identity and importance in this franchise, and her story is enhanced when the music carries you into the scene and the story steers your brain while your eyes are being bombarded by every visual depiction of emotion in such a raw and explosive way. And as an anti-hero and a catalyst for the conflict, I mean, Spider-Man 2099 is on a completely different level. His design, his presence, his music, his world, his command of attention when he's on screen, it's all jaw-dropping. Miguel feels like an assassin, like the Boba Fett of Spider-Man, the Batman of the multiverse who's keeping it all from collapsing, and he operates in such velocity, such intensity, such brutality in his moves and his fighting that this movie dares you to keep up with it constantly. He's drawn unfinished because he's from the future and he's always slightly a second ahead in time. That is a brilliant attention to detail and brilliant design. His motives create an incredible opportunity to question the idea of canon events and the multiverse and how Spider-Man operates in all of this and what is actually true or not, which self-serves into how this character works, and the writing of this film is just outstanding, and it creates more mystery for the entire plot when you really think about Miguel's perspective and how he could be wrong in all of this, and what this movie does to set itself up to be questioned through the use of Spider-Man 2099. But the big thing is that he's not an idiot, and he's not treated as being completely wrong, and you can understand his side and why he feels what he does, and why he's doing what he does when he holds it all together. It's just a brilliant use of anti-hero work and the best version of Spider-Man 2099 I think I've ever seen. I love how Across the Spider-Verse complicates the relationships of everyone by maturing them as the film goes on, and it just makes the relationships so much more interesting and voluminous for the whole story. This truly is like the Empire Strikes Back of Spider-Man stories. This movie, man, I found myself crying not because of the sad moments, but because of moments that were so rewarding. It was such a crescendo of scale and imagination and colors and sound that I had never seen it visualized that way. I had never known I needed to see it this way. This film tackled how to love unconditionally and what that means and those mature themes, and how to love Spider-Man unconditionally, from the mantle to the responsibility to the importance of it. This movie challenges us on the emotional level, the physical level, the spiritual, the mental, the existential, all of it. It challenges the idea of ego death and deconstructing identity as a means of acceptance and growth, all of it at once. This movie is the reward for attention to detail. There is so much detail in this movie. I love the little inferences in this film, how it tells a rich story through the details you don't notice immediately. Things like Miles using the go home machine, but the machine actually reads the DNA of the spider since it changed Miles's DNA, so it sends him to Universe 42. How Miles uses his venom powers to disable Miguel. How Gwen has photos of Miles in the color palette of his dimension because they were taken in his dimension, but when she views him in her dimension, it looks off because she's in pastels. How Gwen uses music to help her fight and build her own identity. That's very Guardians reminiscent. God, I just love the care and attention to detail that this movie brings. The train fight, I mean, that train fight is so good. It has callbacks to Miles' leap of faith in the first film, but this time it's where he learns his true identity, his story, his origin, his place in the universe, his everything. All of that is enhanced by the action. The fighting is so good and creative and vibrant. It feels like the Blade Runner of Spider-Man action and experiences, along with so many small moments where you see and feel the lessons that Miles has learned from the first movie carrying over and leading him into this movie. And that is a cyclical experience that is everywhere in this film, merely enhancing into the Spider-Verse. Across the Spider-Verse was probably the riskiest movie to make because it doesn't do it to sell toys. It's not done to just be a story. It's done because Spider-Man can be and is compelling, and his story is one of the best to tell. And it's worth telling. You need to tell this story, and I'm really glad they did. This is one of the greatest movies of all time. Just flat out, let's just say it. As film and as animation, I have never been more captivated on how they did this. It's so intelligent and the direction is so well crafted. I can't believe humans made this. How did this get made? How was it crafted? How can you have a vision, an imagination so complex and so digestible all at the same time? The vision is so bold and daring and explorative and insane. This movie has such vision. It really brings this trilogy close to being one of the greatest trilogies of all time if they can stick the landing with Beyond the Spider-Verse. This movie is an adult movie. It's so mature and honest and heavy. It's a movie for science fiction fans, for Marvel fans, for Spider-Man fans, for superhero fans, for MCU fans, for fans of mystery and thrillers, and fans of brilliant openings with powerful endings, and a journey through the middle that has layers upon layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. This is one of the best superhero stories, let alone character stories, I have ever seen. This is a real superhero story. This movie justified itself and makes a compelling and powerful purpose for this trilogy, which makes it so fun to rewatch and to love and dive into. It changed how the multiverse could work and why it's important and why that works, which is something other studios should be taking notes of comprehensively. The way it lets its characters breathe, it lets them exist and grow into the nuance before sending them into some of the most wonderful and powerful moments of action and mystery and thriller elements. All of that in their respective times that feed into each other, into the story in a rich way. It's so awesome. They give time for scenes to linger with characters on their personal moments where it begins to bring so much weight and humanity to the film, in a film about being the most human part of Spider-Man, the responsibility of helping because you can. There's humor in Across the Spider-Verse, but it's not a lighthearted movie because it focuses on the stakes it sets for itself and challenges itself to hit those repeatedly in new and innovative ways. And the humor is so real. These characters are so palpably real. It's mind-blowing. The action has always been a result of the plot, allowing it to be fresh and explosive. It's a true comic book leaping out of the pages at you and daring you to let go and get sucked in. This is one of the greatest things I have ever seen. Art, film, movie, experience, game, music, I don't care. This is one of the greatest things I have ever seen. It is a masterpiece. It is a cultural masterpiece. Thank you, creators, for bringing this to life and giving us a new Spider-Man experience. Thank you for elevating Spider-Man into a level that so few heroes ever reach. Thank you for making Across the Spider-Verse just a complete enhancement on every single level from its predecessor and elevating this trilogy into a status that is close to being perfection. This is such a Spider-Man story, and only Spider-Man could tell this kind of story in this way, in this style. And we have to be forever grateful for that. This movie is unbelievable. Thank you, Spider-Man. And as always, thanks for watching.